Hello, everybody. This is Mr. Lipchick, and today our topic of discussion will be education, housing, and transportation, and the federal government's role in each of those things. Okay, public education. The U.S. Constitution leaves the establishment of public schools to state and local authorities. There is nothing in the U.S. Constitution about education. It does, however, provide federal aid to most public schools and school systems. In order to receive federal aid, however, the states and schools must adhere to federal laws and guidelines. Billions of dollars go to K through 12 public schools and to higher education. In 1965, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act was passed, providing aid to local districts. So, if districts want this money, they have to follow the federal guidelines. Also, federal programs provide aid to colleges and universities. Probably the most well-known among them is the GI Bill of Rights, which provides benefits, educational benefits to veterans who wish to go to college. It was passed in 1944 to help a very large generation of young men who would be leaving the service and looking for a future as a way to reward them. And the benefit is to help with tuition and living expenses, and this program is still in place today. Because of the great expense of federal aid to public education, a number of reform movements began in the 1980s. The government report, A Nation at Risk, claimed that American students were falling behind students in other nations. School choice laws have been suggested, allowing students to go to private schools of their choice. And in the 2002, the No Child Left Behind Act provides federal money to state programs, but only if they demonstrate improvement. But with this, you must keep in mind that there are some important facts about the American education system which do not get the attention in the media that the negativity gets. And this is the fact that the U.S. has more high school graduates than any other nation in the world. And we are one of the few countries that allows students of all ability levels to receive 4 years of high school education. And the U.S. has a higher percentage of bachelor degrees, master degrees, and PhD degrees than any other nation in the world. In fact, many people come to this country not only to go to our universities, but also our high schools. Okay, government and housing. What is the federal government's role in housing? The federal government first became involved in these issues during the Depression when millions of people were losing their homes. This was a crisis. We did not want an army of homeless people in the streets. The government responded with loans and housing support payments. And the Housing Act of 1949 was eventually passed with the goal of a decent home and a suitable living environment for every American family. So in order to promote home ownership, the federal government established the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, and the Federal Housing Administration, FHA. The Federal Housing Administration is a department of HUD that guarantees banks and lenders against losses on loans made to those who wish to buy or build homes. Okay, a very important program because home ownership really moves a person forward economically. Once you own your home, you no longer have to pay rent. It's an asset which you can borrow against. It is generally a good thing to have. Some controversial areas in which the federal government has gotten involved would include urban renewal programs. And this is aid given to cities to tear down and rebuild decaying and rundown properties. Okay, now, of course, a lot of people living there had established ties in their neighborhoods and did not like leaving, but they were forced to leave and be relocated. Private developers buy the land at a reduced price and rebuild according to the plans of the city and HUD. And the idea is to create commerce and a more attractive place to live. And usually these go into blighted areas, where there's a lot of damaged buildings and a lot of poverty. Instead, the program has been criticized for destroying low-income neighborhoods, and it's often been called cultural genocide. Usually they're black or Hispanic neighborhoods that go under the wrecking ball, and this has created quite a few problems and a great deal of resentment. Public housing is another area, and this is housing constructed and operated by the government to provide low-rent housing for low-income people. Okay, but many of these facilities became neglected and became slums. To the right, you see Cabrini Green, an infamous building in Chicago, or series of buildings that was drug-infested and extremely problematic. What the housing didn't deal with were the problems, the economic problems, and joblessness and things like that actually led to the crime and everything else. So basically the problem was just moved from an old building into a new one. And eventually these buildings had to come down. They were such a danger. So in response, the federal government has given state and local authorities more power to have control in their public housing decisions. Sometimes, they're moving in the direction of giving loans to people for homes and things like that, because the key is ownership. Once you own something, you're more likely to care for it. Whereas if you're just renting it at a low cost, you may not attend to the needs of that building. Okay, federal government is also involved in transportation. Back to our earliest times. The first transportation project was the construction of the National Road, or Route 40, in 1811, which basically goes from Maryland all the way into Illinois, and you can still travel along parts of the National Road. In fact, if you are ever driving on Route 70 west, heading towards through Ohio, you will see the Zane Grey and National Road Museum. It's worth stopping. It's a little museum, and it will teach you about the National Road. Many interesting facts. Since that time, the government has become more involved in national transportation projects. The National Road made everybody realize that for commerce and greater economic growth, for moving crops to market and things like that, the government needed to be involved in transportation in this country. In 1966, the Department of Transportation was created to coordinate national transportation programs and policies. And the Federal Aviation Administration, or FAA, was a part of that, and it regulates and enforces air traffic, and aviation regulations. Additionally, the Federal Highway Administration oversees federal roads. The Federal Railroad Administration regulates railroad transportation. And the National Highway Safety Administration enforces laws to protect drivers and promotes highway safety. Okay, in 1956, the Federal Aid Highway Act provided states with funds to improve the national interstate highway system. This was the brainchild of Dwight D. Eisenhower. Very important, very early in his career when he was a cadet at West Point, or maybe shortly afterwards, I can't recall, he was given the mission to take the first automobile trip across the country. And, of course, he encountered some roads which were made for horses, some places where there were no roads. And he saw the need for a more developed highway system in the country, and this was something that he would always advocate. And eventually he would preside over the beginning of the interstate system in this country. So the act was passed by Eisenhower, who advocated for it. And although the system is maintained by the state, the federal government provides 90% of the funds needed to maintain it. So before the interstate system, it was a very haphazard road system in this country. My father, who was born in 1930, told me that when he was a kid, his sister and brother-in-law took him to Erie, and they took him in a Model T, and the road they took it was either 8 north or 19 north, and it took them like 4 hours to get up there. Now, today you could get up there in an hour and a half from Pittsburgh. So it's greatly, sped up transportation, not only for individual people driving around and traveling, but also for commerce, for, trucking and things like that. So it has been a major positive thing for the country. In 1995, the National Highway System succeeded the Federal Highway Administration. In other words, it replaced it. The federal government is also involved in creating a better mass transit system overall. There's discussion of magnetic levitation trains, although it seems like all they ever do is discuss it and never gets built. Mass transit is the mass movement of people from one place to another. Urban Mass Transit Administration helps cities develop better transportation systems for their citizens. And the Transportation Equity Act of the 21st century was established to improve the nation's mass transit system. But once again, you can talk about building things all day. It takes the national will and desire to build them. Many people think that Americans are too attached to their automobiles to be advocates of a high-speed rail system, although all of the other major countries have it, and they're very popular. Okay, that concludes our discussion for today. Thank you for your attendance, and I look forward to seeing